Tiber Zane hated diplomacy almost as much as he hated the Xylith. Unfortunately, his life had become a grueling exercise in tolerating both. His latest assignment had him and Alara Quill, a tech prodigy with a penchant for hacking systems and offending people, on a sleek transport vessel en route to a Dyson Sphere city that was supposed to be the Xylith Empire's crowning achievement. Allegedly, it was their equivalent of a diplomatic red carpet, but to Tiber, it felt more like a red flag. Well, if this isn't the universe's most expensive hamster wheel, Tiber muttered, peering through the viewport at the sphere's vast latticework shimmering against the black void. Alara snorted, flicking her fingers over a holographic interface, probably setting up something illegal. She had a gift for turning harmless tech into a weapon of mass annoyance. You've got to hand it to the Xylith. They really know how to overcompensate. Who knew oppressive regimes could have such expensive taste? Yeah, well, when you steal enough resources from human colonies, you can afford some nice real estate. Tiber adjusted his diplomat's sash, which felt more like a noose every time he had to wear it. Time to see if we can convince them that cultural genocide isn't a good look. The docking bay of the Sphere City was as sterile as a surgeon's worst nightmare. The Xylith were nothing if not fastidious about cleanliness, and likely about as much fun at parties. Their delegation awaited in a line, looking like a row of chrome-plated vultures. Tiber took a deep breath, plastering on a smile that felt about as authentic as a counterfeit credit chip. Ambassador Zane, a Xylith representative, greeted, his voice as cold and welcoming as a frozen knife to the gut. "We are honored by your presence." "Yeah, I'm sure you are," Tiber replied, his sarcasm flying right over the Xylith's head, much like a misfired laser. "This is Alara Quill, tech genius and resident troublemaker. She's here to ensure we don't accidentally declare war by pressing the wrong button." Alara gave a mock salute, her grin as sharp as a plasma cutter. "Pleasure to be here, really. Love what you've done with the place. So metallic." The Xylith's lack of response was almost impressive. "We have prepared quarters for you within our diplomatic sector," the representative continued, seemingly unperturbed. "We hope your stay will be enlightening." "Oh, I'm sure it will be," Tiber said, struggling to keep the bitterness out of his tone. "Lead the way to the enlightening quarters, then." Their quarters turned out to be just as inviting as a prison cell. If you squinted, you might mistake the metal furniture for art. Alara flopped onto the cold, hard slab that passed for a couch. "It's like they went out of their way to make sure no one ever wants to come back," she said, kicking her feet up onto the table. "Nice touch with the no windows motif. Really makes you feel like you're in one of those existentialist plays." Tiber was too busy trying to get their communication device to work to reply. The Xylith had a peculiar talent for censoring anything remotely resembling human culture. "They say it's for security reasons," he grumbled, slapping the device. "I say it's because they can't stand the thought of us singing karaoke." "Imagine the horror," Alara agreed, pulling out her own device that seemed to be functioning just fine. "Thank you very much. I'll have this place singing Bohemian Rhapsody by tomorrow. Just you wait." Tiber couldn't help but chuckle. "In the meantime, how about we figure out how to convince these peace-loving tyrants to stop erasing our culture?" Alara's eyes gleamed with mischief. "As long as I get to hack into their systems and leave some delightful surprises along the way, I'm game." The next day, they found themselves in an opulent yet somehow still depressing conference room. The Xylith Council sat on one side of the table, their expressions as inscrutable as ever. Tiber and Alara took their seats on the other, feeling like schoolchildren about to be lectured by the galaxy's least favorite principal. "We are eager to begin discussions," the head Xylith said, a grin spreading across his face that set off every internal alarm Tiber possessed. It was the kind of grin you'd expect from someone who just found out they don't have to pay taxes this year. "Likewise," Tiber replied, deciding that diplomacy was the art of saying nice doggy while looking for a bigger stick. Let's start with the recent reports of censorship in human colonies. We have reason to believe. There is no censorship, the Xylith interrupted, waving a dismissive hand. Merely preservation of order and peace. Surely you can appreciate the value of harmony. Harmony through erasure, Alara chimed in, her voice sweet as a poisoned apple. Bold strategy. Let us know how that works out for you. Tiber tried not to wince. What my colleague means is that we're concerned about the implications of such actions on human cultural development. The Xylith looked unconcerned. Cultural development is overrated, Tiber sighed internally. Look, we're just asking for freedom of expression. You know, the right to hum a tune without needing your approval. Freedom, said the Xylith as if it were a four-letter word, is a human construct, one that often leads to chaos. Alara leaned forward, her eyes full of a defiance that was practically begging for a fight. Or it's the thing that stops people from being mindless drones. But hey, you do you. The meeting went on like that, with more back and forth than a ping-pong tournament. Tiber's patience wore thinner than cheap space station coffee. The Xylith had perfected the art of double-speak, and every time they seemed to concede a point, they snatched it back with the grace of a pickpocket. By the end, Tiber felt like he'd been through a meat grinder. Well, that was productive, he muttered as they exited the conference room. If by productive you mean a colossal waste of time. Alara laughed, a sound that rang out louder than it should in the stark metal hallways. At least we kept them on their toes. For a bunch of emotionless bureaucrats, they sure seem fond of dancing around the truth. Let's just hope we can find a way to make them stop stepping on yours, Tiber said, rubbing his temples. My head feels like it's been used as a drum. They retired to their quarters, where Alara immediately began fiddling with her device. I've got an idea, she said, her voice tinged with that dangerous edge Tiber had come to both love and fear. Something that'll really get under their skin. Tiber raised an eyebrow. Do I want to know? Probably not, Alara replied without looking up, her fingers dancing over the holographic display like a concert pianist with a particularly rowdy audience. But when it's done, they'll know what it means to be messed with. Tiber watched her work, feeling a strange mix of admiration and dread. Just try not to start an intergalactic incident, okay? Alara smirked. No promises. The next day, Tiber awoke to a cacophony of alarms and flashing lights. He stumbled out of bed, rubbing his eyes. What the hell is going on? Alara was already fully awake, an unholy grin plastered across her face. I might have sent a few modifications through the Xylith's network. Modifications, Tiber echoed, his voice rising with alarm. What did you do? Alara shrugged, as if she hadn't just potentially started a war. Let's just say their systems are now broadcasting some classic Earth music. A little we will rock you to remind them who they're dealing with. You hacked their systems to play Queen. Tiber couldn't help it, he laughed, a sound that was part disbelief, part genuine amusement. You're insane. And yet you keep me around, Alara shot back, a twinkle in her eye. Let's see how they handle a little cultural exchange. The Xylith's reaction was as expected, swift and severe. Within hours, Tiber and Alara found themselves summoned to an emergency council meeting. The Xylith were not amused, their expressions as rigid as the metal walls surrounding them. This breach of protocol is unacceptable, the head Xylith stated, his voice colder than a vacuum. This is an act of aggression. Oh, lighten up, Alara replied, unfazed. Consider it a gift. You guys really need to work on your playlists. Tiber pinched the bridge of his nose, feeling a headache brewing. Look, it's clear there's been a misunderstanding. Let's just focus on finding a resolution that works for both sides. The Xylith seemed to consider this, though their expression suggested they'd rather be considering how best to vaporize the pair of humans in front of them. We will discuss this among ourselves, the head Xylith finally said, his tone begrudging. For now, you are confined to your quarters. As they were escorted back, Tiber glanced at Alara. This was part of your plan, right? To get us locked away while they argue over what to do about us. Alara shrugged again, looking entirely too pleased with herself. Well, it was either that or let them keep erasing our culture without a fight. This way, we buy some time and maybe even shake things up. Despite himself, Tiber found that he was smiling. You might just be a genius after all. Alara grinned, that mischievous glint back in her eyes. Don't you ever forget it. As they stepped into their quarters, Tiber couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get a lot more complicated. But for now, they had a brief respite and a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could outsmart the Xylith. So, what's next on the agenda? Tiber asked, leaning against the wall. Next, Alara replied, her fingers already dancing over her device. I think it's time we taught them about the joys of memes. After all, nothing says cultural resilience like a good meme war. Tiber Zane was trying to convince himself that the pounding in his head was merely the result of a hangover, the kind you get from consuming an entire week's worth of bad news and cheap whiskey. Sadly, the Xylith's version of a refreshing morning wake-up call involved a relentless cacophony of alarms echoing through the corridors. It was like being serenaded by a choir of malfunctioning droids. Isn't this a delightful way to start the day? Alara Quill quipped, her voice dripping with sarcasm. She was already up, fiddling with a holographic interface and looking far too chipper for someone in their predicament. If by delightful you mean a living nightmare, then sure, why not? Tiber replied, trying to summon the willpower to leave his lumpy excuse for a bed. He missed the days when his biggest problem was a minor trade dispute or an interplanetary faux pas. Now he was dealing with an empire that thought cultural genocide was the height of sophistication. Tiber and Alara had barely begun to scrape the sleep from their eyes when a Xylith guard summoned them to yet another meeting. Urgent matters require your presence, the guard stated, his tone suggesting that resistance was as futile as trying to explain the concept of fun to a tax auditor. Can't wait to see what they've got planned for us today, Alara murmured as they were escorted through the cold, sterile halls. Maybe a PowerPoint presentation on how to suck the joy out of the universe. That, or a polite request to jump out of an airlock, Tiber replied, mentally preparing himself for another round of intergalactic nonsense. The conference room was depressingly familiar, all metal and sharp angles. The kind of place that made you question whether interior designers in the Xylith Empire were selected for their ability to induce despair. The Xylith Council sat like statues, their expressions a masterclass in malevolent indifference. We have reviewed the recent incident, the head Xylith began, his voice like ice scraping across a frozen lake. And it has expedited a decision we have long considered. Let me guess, Tiber interjected, trying to keep his voice steady. You've decided the universe would be a better place without human culture cluttering it up. Precisely, the Xylith replied without a hint of irony. We will begin a campaign to cleanse your influence from our territories. Alara's eyes flashed with defiance. Cleansing, that's rich. Why stop there? Maybe throw in purification and liberation for good measure. Really sell that whole evil overlord vibe you've got going. Tiber shot her a look that hovered somewhere between admiration and exasperation. Leave it to Alara to poke a bear when they were already deep in the cave. Your sarcasm is noted, the Xylith said dryly. However, it will not alter our course. Our technological superiority ensures your resistance is futile. Technological superiority, Tiber echoed, trying to buy time. You've certainly got that in spades, but creativity, innovation, those are fields where humans excel. The Xylith seemed to ponder this, their expressions still unreadable. You believe your creativity can match our technology? The head Xylith asked, a note of curiosity in his monotone voice. Alara leaned forward, her smirk as sharp as a laser scalpel. Not just match, outthink, outmaneuver, outlast. You may have the gadgets, but we've got the gumption. Tiber silently marveled at her audacity. It was the kind of reckless confidence that had gotten them into this mess, but might just be the key to getting them out as well. Perhaps we can find a way to coexist without erasing each other, he suggested, trying to sound diplomatic even as his patience frayed. "We will consider your words," the head Xylith conceded, though his tone suggested he'd rather consider a root canal. But do not mistake this for leniency. As they were led back to their quarters, Tiber couldn't help but feel like they were walking a tightrope, high above a pit filled with bureaucratic sharks. "Think we got through to them?" Tiber asked as the door slid shut behind them. "Unlikely," Alara replied, her fingers already dancing over her device. "But we've bought ourselves some time. Now we just need to figure out how to use it. Got any bright ideas?" Tiber asked, hoping for a miracle but bracing for chaos. "Well," Alara said, her grin widening, "I've been working on a little something. A way to turn their own tech against them." Tiber raised an eyebrow. "And this little something wouldn't happen to involve more musical invasions, would it?" "Oh, much better than music," Alara promised. "I'm thinking more along the lines of a virtual virus, something that can slip past their defenses and disrupt their systems from within." Tiber couldn't help but admire her ingenuity. It was risky, sure, but also brilliant. "You really think you can pull that off?" "I know I can," Alara said with a confidence that was almost contagious. "But I'll need your help. You've got the connections, the diplomatic finesse." "I just need a way in," Tiber nodded, already considering their options. "I'll see what strings I can pull. Maybe there's a sympathetic ear among the Xylith who will turn a blind eye for the right price or promise." "Let's hope so," Alara replied, her focus returning to her device. "Otherwise, we're going to need a plan B and C and D." As Tiber watched her work, he couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. It was a dangerous thing, hope. But in the face of annihilation, it was also the only thing keeping them going. The following days were a blur of covert meetings and whispered conversations. Tiber, ever the diplomat, managed to secure a clandestine rendezvous with a Xylith scientist who was less than thrilled with the Council's decisions. "You understand the risk I take by meeting you," the scientist said, casting nervous glances around the shadowy room. His name was unpronounceable in human tongues, so Tiber took to calling him Doctor, Nervous Nelly in private. "We understand and we appreciate it," Tiber assured him. "But we need your help. Humans may not be as advanced as the Xylith, but we have a knack for finding creative solutions to impossible problems. And creating impossible problems out of nothing," Alara added, earning a chuckle from the scientist. "I have seen your creativity," Dr. Nervous Nelly admitted. "It is unique, but the Council is steadfast. They will not be swayed by words or ideas. Only results. Then results are what we'll give them," Alara said, her determination as fierce as ever. "We just need a little access to your systems, enough to plant the seeds of chaos." The scientist hesitated, clearly torn between loyalty to his people and the growing unease with their methods. "I can provide limited access," he said finally. "But if you are caught, I will disavow any knowledge of this." "Understood," Tiber said, offering his hand in that uniquely human gesture of trust. "You have our word." As they left the meeting, Tiber couldn't shake a sense of foreboding. They were playing a dangerous game, one that could easily end in disaster, but if they succeeded, they might just save their culture from extinction. "Think he'll come through for us?" Alara asked as they navigated the labyrinthine corridors back to their quarters. "He's got his own doubts about the Council," Tiber replied, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "Let's hope that's enough." "Hope," Alara mused, a rare note of introspection in her voice. "It's a funny thing, isn't it? Makes you think you can fight an empire with nothing but a handful of half-baked plans and a smile." Tiber chuckled, appreciating the gallows humor. "If anyone can do it, it's us." The clock was ticking, and so were their chances. With Alara's virtual virus ready to unleash digital pandemonium and Tiber's diplomatic maneuvering in place, they were poised at the brink of what could be their greatest triumph, or their final catastrophe. As they prepared to launch their mad gambit, Tiber couldn't help but reflect on how far they'd come. Once, they'd been just two humans trying to navigate the treacherous waters of interstellar diplomacy. Now they were about to take on an empire armed with nothing but wits and willpower. "Ready," Alara asked, her finger hovering over the final command. Ready as I'll ever be, Tiber replied, taking a deep breath. Let's give them something to remember us by. With a nod, Alara activated the virus, setting in motion a chain of events that would either save their species or doom it to oblivion. It was a gamble, a desperate roll of the dice. But as Tiber watched the Xylith systems begin to flicker and glitch, he felt a surge of defiant pride. In the end, it wasn't about winning or losing. It was about showing the Xylith and themselves what it meant to be human, to fight for your culture, your identity, even when the odds were stacked against you, to laugh in the face of certain doom and dare to dream of a better future. And if that wasn't worth fighting for, Tiber didn't know what was. Alara Quill leaned back in her chair, staring at the holographic interface like it was a particularly insolent child refusing to eat its vegetables. All right, you bloody circuit board. Let's see how you like a bit of human creativity, she muttered, fingers tapping out a rhythm that was more jazz solo than military march. Tiber Zane, lurking in the corner with all the charm of a malfunctioning toaster, peered over her shoulder. You talk to it like that often. I'm starting to think you might be the AI whisperer. If by whisperer you mean swear at until it bends to my will, then yes, Alara shot back, flashing him a grin that was more wolf than woman. Their latest weapon against the Xylith Empire's technological supremacy was a digital meme. Not just any meme. This was a Trojan horse of the highest order, capable of infiltrating the Xylith communication networks under the guise of harmless humor. The kind of meme that would make even the most hardened interstellar bureaucrat question their life choices. What's it say again? Tiber asked, leaning in with the kind of interest usually reserved for the final spin on a game show. It's a classic, Alara replied, eyes gleaming with mischief. You can't spell Xylith without lit, but that's only because you're too busy burning everything else to the ground. Tiber snorted. Subtle, real subtle. Think it'll work. Worked on you, didn't it? She retorted, sending the meme out into the digital void with a flourish. Now let's see if it can tickle some Xylith funny bones. The Xylith, of course, were notorious for their lack of humor. They were the kind of species that'd find a funeral procession more riveting than a comedy club. But Alara knew a good meme was like a virus, impossible to ignore, and even harder to get rid of. As the message wove its way through the Xylith networks, Alara leaned back with a satisfied sigh. Now we wait. Hope their advanced AI isn't as dull as the rest of them, Tiber said, crossing his arms. Otherwise, we're up a creek without a propulsion module. It wasn't long before the Xylith's advanced AI detected the meme's presence, like a bloodhound on a scent. In moments, the network flickered with activity, the Empire's digital defenses rallying to contain the strange new intrusion. Oh, Alara murmured, watching the digital countermeasures spring to life. Looks like they've found our little present. Well, that was quick, Tiber said, trying to mask his rising apprehension with bravado. Didn't even get to the punchline. Don't worry, Alara replied, fingers flying across the interface. I've got a whole arsenal of hilarity lined up. With a diftness that could only come from years of experience and a healthy disregard for her own safety, Alara began embedding subversive messages into the Xylith communication networks. Each meme was more audacious than the last, a veritable blitzkrieg of digital insolence. How about this one? She said, tapping a command. Xylith diplomacy, like a hug but with more strangulation. That's sure to win hearts and minds, Tiber quipped, shaking his head. If they had any to begin with. Yet, the Xylith AI adapted with alarming speed. Each time Alara's meme slipped past one line of defense, another sprang up to take its place, a relentless tide of digital efficiency. Okay, this is getting ridiculous, Alara said, frustration edging her voice. Their systems are like a bloody hydra, chop off one head and two more pop up. Guess we underestimated their sense of humor, Tiber remarked, peering at the rapidly shifting data, or their lack thereof. Time to double down, Alara decided, her eyes narrowing in determination. We need to innovate faster than they can adapt. Got any bright ideas? Tiber asked, more out of hope than expectation. "Oh, I've got a few," Alara replied, lips curling into a smirk. "But you might want to hold on to something." With the kind of reckless abandon that had landed her in trouble more times than she cared to admit, Alara initiated a new sequence. This time the memes weren't just infiltrating. They were evolving, shifting, and changing with each iteration, becoming more complex and harder to detect. "You're turning them into a digital hydra of our own," Tiber observed, a note of awe creeping into his voice. "Exactly," Alara said, her fingers dancing over the holographic interface. "Let's see how they like a taste of their own medicine." The Xylith AI fought back valiantly, but the evolving memes were a step ahead, adapting and outmaneuvering with each digital skirmish. It was a battle of wits and ones and zeros, a high-stakes chess match played out on the vast expanse of the Xylith networks. "Think this'll be enough?" Tiber asked, watching the data stream across the interface. "It'll have to be," Alara replied, her voice steady despite the chaos. "We've got no other choice." As the digital warfare raged on, Tiber couldn't help but marvel at Alara's tenacity. She was like a force of nature, a storm of ingenuity and defiance that refused to be tamed. It was inspiring and terrifying all at once. "Meanwhile, I'll see if I can rustle up a plan B," Tiber said, turning to leave. "And maybe a plan C, just in case." "Good idea," Alara nodded, eyes still fixed on her work. "We're going to need all the backup we can get." Tiber slipped out of the room, leaving Alara to her digital battle. In the sterile corridors of the Dyson Sphere City, he felt the weight of their mission pressing down on him like a low-hanging cloud. Failure wasn't an option, but success seemed equally elusive. His path led him to a series of clandestine meetings with individuals who were as disillusioned with the Xylith Council as they were. Most were hesitant, wary of the repercussions of aiding the humans. But desperation had a way of bending even the firmest of wills. One such meeting brought him face to face with a Xylith technician who went by the name of Zevado. "Why risk helping us?" Tiber asked, eyes scanning the dimly lit room for any signs of eavesdroppers. Zevado shrugged, his expression a mix of resignation and defiance. "Because sometimes you have to choose the lesser evil, and I find myself tired of the greater one." Tiber nodded, understanding all too well the sentiment. "We need access to their main control hub." Just enough to give Alara's memes a fighting chance. Zevado hesitated, clearly weighing the risks. "I can get you clothes," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "But the rest is up to you." "That's all we need," Tiber assured him, placing a grateful hand on his shoulder. "Thank you." As he made his way back, Tiber couldn't shake the feeling that they were still a few steps behind. The Xylith's adaptability was impressive, a testament to their technological prowess. But it was also their Achilles heel, a rigidity that left little room for the unexpected. When he returned to their quarters, Alara was still entrenched in her digital warfare, eyes dancing with the glow of the holographic interface. "How's it going?" he asked, pulling up a chair beside her. "Better," she replied, sparing him a brief glance. "But not by much. The Xylith AI is like a bloody octopus reaching out in all directions." "Think our new friend will be able to help?" Tiber asked, leaning back with a sigh. "He'd better," Alara said, her fingers never missing a beat. "Or we're going to need a plan D." Tiber chuckled despite the gravity of their situation. "You ever get tired of defying the odds?" "Never," Alara replied, flashing him a grin. "It's what keeps life interesting." Days blurred into nights, the relentless march of time a constant reminder of the stakes they faced. Alara's memes continued to evolve, a digital symphony of subversion, while Tiber worked tirelessly behind the scenes, securing allies and plotting potential escape routes. It was a delicate dance, a balancing act between hope and despair, ingenuity and futility. Yet in the face of overwhelming odds, they found solace in the one thing that had always defined humanity: resilience. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Alara leaned back with a triumphant sigh. "I think we've got them on the ropes." Tiber looked over at her, eyes wide with hope. Seriously," Alara confirmed, her expression one of fierce determination. The Xylith AI is struggling to keep up with our evolving memes. We've bought ourselves some breathing room. That's incredible, Tiber said, unable to keep the admiration from his voice. You're incredible. Flattery will get you everywhere, Alara replied with a wink. But we're not out of the woods yet. We need to keep the pressure on and find a way to capitalize on this advantage. Tiber nodded, already formulating their next move. I've got a few ideas, he said, his mind racing with possibilities. If we can disrupt their control hub even for a moment, it might give us the opening we need. Then let's do it, Alara said, her eyes alight with determination. This is our chance to turn the tide. Together, they hatched a daring plan to strike at the heart of the Xylith Empire's control. It was a gamble, a last-ditch effort to break the stranglehold of a technologically superior foe. But it was also a testament to the indomitable spirit of humanity, a refusal to go quietly into the night. As they prepared for the next phase of their audacious campaign, Tiber couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. It was a dangerous thing, hope, but it was also the only thing that could light the way forward in the darkness. Ready to make some history? He asked, glancing over at Alara. Always, she replied, her voice steady and unwavering. Let's show them what it means to be human. With a shared nod of resolve, they set their plan into motion, determined to defy the odds and carve a path to victory against all logic and reason. In the end, it wasn't about the memes or the technology. It was about the people, the will to fight for what they believed in, and the courage to stand against an empire that threatened to erase them from existence. And if that wasn't worth fighting for, Tiber didn't know what was. The alarms blared again, that same delightful symphony of malfunctioning droids serenading the Xylith corridors. It was the kind of sound Tiber imagined would be playing in Hell's waiting room. If the Xylith had any sense of humor, they'd be laughing their tentacles off. But humor was as alien to them as, well, everything else about humanity. Tiber and Alara were huddled together in what passed for a secure hideout, which really just meant a room no one else cared enough to search. It was cramped, with the walls close enough to make claustrophobics break out in hives. Not that it mattered much to Tiber. He was too busy trying to figure out how many ways their elaborate plan could go wrong. Spoiler: a lot. So, what's next on the agenda? Tiber asked, his tone heavily laced with the kind of sarcasm that could melt steel. Do we start a knitting circle, or maybe teach the Xylith about interpretive dance? Alara smirked, not looking up from her holographic interface. I'm thinking more along the lines of introducing them to the fine art of slam poetry. Really get under their skin. Yeah, well, better hope they don't slam us first, Tiber shot back. These Xylith bastards are getting more paranoid by the minute. I swear they've got surveillance in places I didn't even know existed. Like where? Alara asked, eyes still glued to the interface as she manipulated data streams with the kind of dexterity that would put a concert pianist to shame. You know, Tiber said with a wave of his hand, places. Like the inside of my skull, maybe. She chuckled at that, a dry humor that was as rare as a Xylith smile. We'll just have to outthink them, Tiber, like we always do. If only that was comforting, he muttered, leaning back against the cold, metallic wall. Meanwhile, our merry band of rebels is starting to fray at the edges. Some of them think we're poking the hornet's nest a bit too much. Alara finally tore her gaze from the interface, her expression a mask of determination. We can't stop now, Tibbs. We're in too deep. If we back off, it's over. Yeah, try telling that to the folks who are shaking in their boots, Tiber replied. They've got families back on those colonies. And you've seen what the Xylith do to places that step out of line. The truth hung heavy in the air, like a guillotine waiting to drop. The Xylith weren't known for their patience or mercy. Rebellion wasn't just risky, it was a death wish. Then we just have to succeed, Alara said, her voice taking on that edge of manic determination he'd come to recognize. There's no other option. Optimistic as ever, Tiber said dryly. I'll be sure to remember that when we're all doing the cha-cha in a Xylith detention center. Their conversation was interrupted by a loud beep from Alara's interface. Her eyes darted back to the display, fingers resuming their dance. "They're tightening security," she said, her voice tinged with frustration. "It's like they're reading my mind." "Wouldn't surprise me," Tiber replied. "The way they steal resources wouldn't put it past them to steal thoughts too." "Well, they can't have mine," Alara said defiantly, her fingers flying over the holographic keys. "I'm going to give them something they won't forget." Tiber watched her work, a mix of admiration and apprehension simmering beneath his veneer of sarcasm. Alara was relentless, a brilliant mind that refused to be contained, but he worried about what would happen when the Xylith finally caught up with them. "Just be careful," he said, the words almost feeling foreign coming from his lips. She glanced up at him, a rare softness in her eyes. "Always am. Besides, I'm too stubborn to let them have the last laugh." They both knew it was a lie, but in a world as bleak as theirs, sometimes a little denial was necessary to keep going. The tension within their group was mounting, the pressure of constant surveillance and the threat of Xylith retaliation weighing heavily on each of them. The Xylith control hub was proving to be a fortress, and their own people were starting to doubt whether they should be storming it at all. "Some of the others want to talk," Tiber said, pushing off the wall with a sigh. "We need to address the morale issue." "Great," Alara said without enthusiasm. "I love a good morale crisis. Really spices up the day." "Yeah, well, just don't spice it up too much," Tiber warned. "We're already in enough hot water as it is." When the two of them finally stepped into the dimly lit meeting area, a room that could generously be described as cozy if you happen to be a sardine, the atmosphere was thick with unease. A handful of their comrades had gathered, their faces lined with the kinds of worries that didn't easily wash away. Dale, a grizzled veteran of too many failed missions, was the first to speak up. "What the hell are we doing, Tiber? We're poking the beast, and it's only a matter of time before it bites back." "We're doing what we have to do," Tiber replied, his voice steady but lacking enthusiasm. "Last I checked, living under Xylith rule wasn't a picnic." "Yeah, well, poking the beast is one thing," Dale shot back, "but we're practically trying to give it a haircut now." "Good luck finding its head," Alara muttered, earning a few chuckles from those who weren't too far gone to appreciate the humor. "Look," Tiber said, running a hand through his hair, "we knew this wasn't going to be easy." The Xylith control their empire with an iron grip and a sense of humor that makes a brick wall look lively. "That's comforting," Marion, a younger recruit, chimed in, her sarcasm sharp enough to cut glass. "Are we supposed to laugh them to death?" "Not laugh," Alara interjected. "Confuse, distract, disrupt. The Xylith aren't built to handle chaos. They thrive on order, predictability. We take that away and we stand a chance. Or we just piss them off more," Dale said, crossing his arms. "And then where does that leave us? Dead or worse in a Xylith zoo." "Better to die on our feet than live on our knees," Alara replied, her gaze hard and unwavering. "And what about our families?" Marion asked, her voice tinged with desperation. "What happens to them if we fail?" Tiber exchanged a glance with Alara, both of them knowing the weight of that question all too well. "We won't let that happen," he said finally, hoping his words carried the weight of promise and not just empty bravado. "Look," Alara said, addressing the room with a determined gaze, "we're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for everyone back home. Every meme, every bit of chaos we sow, it's a step closer to freedom." Dale sighed heavily, the fight slipping from his posture. "I just hope you know what you're doing." "I pretend really well," Alara replied with a half-smile. "Besides, we've got each other right, and that counts for something." As the group dispersed, the tension lessened but didn't vanish entirely. It loomed, an ever-present shadow that refused to be dispelled. Tiber and Alara lingered, the weight of leadership pressing down on them like a vice. "Think they're convinced?" Alara asked, her tone lighter than the situation warranted. "They're convinced enough," Tiber replied. "Not like they've got a lot of options." "Neither do we," she said, turning back to her interface. But that's not gonna stop us. Tiber nodded, feeling the familiar pull of determination mixed with trepidation. Guess it's time to do what we do best. What's that? Alara asked, a hint of a smile playing at her lips. Screw things up, Tiber said with a grin. For them, not us. Here's hoping, she replied, refocusing on the interface. Let's give the Xylith something to really complain about. As they settled into their respective tasks, the alarms began to blare once again, their shrill cries echoing through the corridors like a demented symphony. To Tiber, it was the sound of an empire teetering on the brink of chaos, and he couldn't help but marvel at how much he liked it. The alarms blared like a symphony of screaming banshees, each note a reminder of how deeply screwed they were. Tiber and Alara were in the cramped hideout, a place that was starting to feel less like a refuge and more like a tomb. It was clear the Xylith had ramped up their game. They were no longer just a looming threat. They were a sword, and it was hanging by a thread over human necks. I swear these alarms could wake the dead, Tiber said, rubbing his temples. Or worse, they might wake the Xylith's sense of humor. Alara barely looked up from her work, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface with the urgency of someone trying to defuse a bomb. If only we could lull their surveillance network to sleep instead. Not much luck there, huh? Tiber asked, knowing full well the answer. She shook her head. They're intercepting everything. Our comms are about as secure as a screen door on a spaceship. Great, Tiber muttered. We're isolated, we're hunted, and our allies are dropping like flies in a bug zapper. The news was grim. Their little band of merry resistance fighters had been picked off one by one. A brutal crackdown by the Xylith had led to the capture of key human allies, leaving Tiber and Alara stranded in a sea of metallic corridors and hostile droids. It was only a matter of time before the Xylith tightened the noose completely. Dale had been one of the first to go, snatched up during a supply run that had turned into an ambush. Marion wasn't far behind, caught while trying to rally the remaining rebels. Each loss was a blow not just to their numbers but to their spirits. Guess they're not joining us for karaoke night, Tiber remarked bitterly. Alara paused, her eyes dark with worry. We have to keep moving, Tiber. The Xylith won't stop until they've crushed every last one of us. Ah, yes, Tiber said with mock enthusiasm. The relentless pursuit of extermination. Their most cherished pastime. She allowed herself a small, tight-lipped smile. If they spend as much effort on diplomacy as they do on genocide, we might actually get somewhere. Fat chance of that, he replied. The Xylith probably think diplomacy is a type of weapon. The conversation died there, choked by the reality of their predicament. Tiber glanced around the hideout, noting how the walls seemed to be closing in. They were running out of time, and worse, they were running out of hope. We can't keep this up, he said, the admission tasting bitter on his tongue. If we stay here, they'll find us. It's only a matter of when, not if. I'm aware, Alara said, her voice barely above a whisper, but we can't just give up. There's still a chance, as slim as it might be. Yeah, but at what cost? Our lives, our sanity. We've lost so many already. He watched her work, the holographic interface casting eerie shadows across her face. She was a picture of stubborn resolve, even as the world crumbled around them. There's still the digital meme, she said, her fingers never stopping. If we can just get it past their defenses, it could disrupt their network, maybe buy us some time. And if it doesn't, Tiber asked. Then we'll have to improvise, Alara replied, her tone far more confident than he felt. Great improvisation, Tiber sighed. My favorite kind of plan when everything's already on fire. With their allies captured or scattered, the two of them were alone, cut off from any support. The Xylith's surveillance was everywhere, a suffocating blanket of paranoia that left no room for error. Every move they made felt like tempting fate. Do you ever wonder how we ended up here? Tiber asked, breaking the silence. All the time, Alara replied. But dwelling on it won't help. We have to keep looking forward. It's the only way. Forward into what exactly? Into whatever comes next, she said. Even if it's just another Xylith wake-up call. Their conversation was interrupted by the familiar buzz of the Xylith Guard's summons, a sound that had become synonymous with dread. Resistance was futile, but ignoring it wasn't an option either. The Xylith were nothing if not persistent. "Think they'd let us politely decline?" Tiber asked, already knowing the answer. "Not unless you want an intimate tour of their detention facilities," Alara replied. "Hard pass," Tiber said. "I've got enough nightmares without adding that to the list." They shared a moment of silent understanding, a brief connection in the midst of chaos. Together, they stepped out of the hideout, leaving the relative safety of the cramped walls behind. The Xylith corridors stretched out before them, an endless maze of cold metal and malfunctioning droids. "Brace yourself," Alara murmured. "This is going to get worse before it gets better." "Story of our lives," Tiber replied. "But hey, at least we'll have front row seats to the apocalypse." As they made their way through the corridors, the reality of their isolation became even starker. The Xylith had them boxed in, their every move watched, every action anticipated. It was like playing chess against an opponent who could read your mind, a losing game with no possibility of a draw. "It doesn't have to end this way," Alara said, her voice barely audible over the whirring of droid patrols. "And how exactly does it end, then?" Tiber asked. "With us in a Xylith zoo. Not if we have anything to say about it." Alara paused, tapping a series of commands into her interface. A hologram flickered to life, displaying the schematics of the Xylith control hub. It was their only hope, the one place where they could strike a decisive blow. "That's our target," she said, pointing to the hologram. "If we can upload the meme there, it might be enough to tip the scales. And if it isn't, then we go down swinging." Tiber studied the hologram, his mind racing with the implications. It was a long shot, a gamble with their lives as the stakes, but as dire as things were, they had little choice. "Let's do it," he said, the words feeling like a declaration of war. "For Dale, for Marion, for everyone who can't fight anymore. For all of us," Alara agreed. They moved quickly, their footsteps echoing in the empty corridors like ghosts of those who had gone before. Each step brought them closer to the Xylith control hub, and closer to a confrontation that could end them all. "Think we'll make it?" Tiber asked, trying to project a confidence he didn't feel. "We have to," Alara replied. "It's not just about us. It's about everyone back home, everyone who can't do this themselves." He nodded, the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a leaden cloak. They were the last line of defense, the only ones left to challenge the Xylith's iron grip. "Well," Tiber said, forcing a grin, "here's to doing the impossible." They reached the entrance to the Xylith control hub, a monolithic structure that loomed like a giant sentinel. It was a testament to their oppressors, a fortress designed to withstand any assault. "Welcome to the lion's den," Alara said, her voice carrying a note of grim resolve. "More like the snake's pit," Tiber replied. "And we're the mice." They hesitated at the threshold, knowing there was no turning back. It was now or never, do or die. "Ready?" Alara asked, her eyes hard with determination. "As I'll ever be," Tiber replied. "Let's give him hell." With that, they stepped forward, leaving behind the last vestiges of safety. The Xylith control hub awaited, a crucible where their fates would be decided. Inside, the air was thick with tension, the hum of machinery filling the space like a dirge. The Xylith were waiting, their presence a sinister shadow that loomed over everything. "Stay sharp," Alara whispered, her fingers poised over the interface. "This is it." Tiber nodded, his senses on high alert. The room was a nest of technology, screens and consoles blinking with alien intelligence. It was a nerve center, a place where decisions were made and lives extinguished with a keystroke. "Time to introduce them to our little meme," Alara said, her voice steely with determination. As she set to work, Tiber kept watch, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of danger. The Xylith were out there, lurking just beyond the edges of perception, waiting for their chance to strike. "Any day now," Tiber muttered, his anxiety mounting with each passing second. "Patience is a virtue, Tiber," Alara replied, her focus unwavering. Even if it's not one the Xylith possess, he snorted. Patience is overrated, especially when you're trying not to get vaporized. The seconds ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. But finally, Alara's fingers stilled, a look of triumph on her face. "It's done," she said, her voice carrying a note of victory. "The meme is in." "Nice work," Tiber replied. "Now let's hope it spreads faster than a bad rash." They turned to leave, but the sound of footsteps halted them in their tracks. The Xylith were coming, their approach heralded by the ominous clinking of metal on metal. "We need to move," Alara said urgently, her eyes darting to the exit. "No arguments here," Tiber replied, his heart pounding in his chest. They bolted from the control hub, the corridor stretching out before them like a gauntlet. Behind them, the Xylith were in pursuit, their cries echoing through the halls like the hounds of hell. "It's like they're issuing a challenge," Tiber said, half joking despite the danger. "Let's not stick around to find out," Alara replied, her breath coming in short, sharp bursts. They sprinted down the corridor, the walls a blur as they raced for safety. The Xylith were relentless, their footsteps growing louder with each passing moment. It was a chase, a deadly game of cat and mouse with no room for error. "Almost there," Alara gasped, the exit just ahead. "Go, go, go," Tiber urged, adrenaline fueling his every step. They burst through the door, the blare of alarms following them like a curse. The hangar bay was just ahead, their only hope of escape. Alara skidded to a halt, her eyes scanning the bay for their way out. "There," she pointed, a small craft nestled in the shadows. "Think it'll fly?" Tiber asked, his skepticism apparent. "Better than waiting around," Alara replied. "Let's get the hell out of here." They raced for the ship, the Xylith hot on their heels. It was a gamble, a desperate bid for freedom with everything on the line. Come on," Tiber muttered, urging the ship to life. The engines roared to life, a promise of escape and a beacon of hope. They climbed aboard, the hatch ceiling shut just as the Xylith reached them. "Punch it," Alara said, her voice a mix of relief and urgency. With a lurch, the ship shot into space, leaving the Xylith control hub behind. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was a step towards survival, towards freedom. "Well," Tiber said, finally able to breathe, "we're not dead, so that's something." Alara gave a weary smile. "Yeah. It's not much, but it's a start." They were still outmatched, still hunted. But for the first time in a long while they had hope, a fragile, flickering light in the darkness. And for now, that was enough. Tiber Zane had come to terms with the reality that optimism was for suckers, but even he had to admit their recent escape was a stroke of luck, or stupidity. Hard to tell the difference these days. As their borrowed craft hurtled through the void, the cold blue glow from the control panel drenched them in a harsh light that was about as comforting as hugging a cactus. "Nice flying back there," Tiber commented, leaning back in his seat. "I almost thought we'd make it out in one piece." "Almost is about as good as it gets," Alara replied, her eyes fixed on the screen displaying the star-speckled abyss. "But hey, at least we've upgraded from completely doomed to mostly screwed." "Guess that's something to toast to," Tiber said, raising an imaginary glass. "To a long life and a sudden death." Alara smirked, but the humor didn't reach her eyes. They were still in enemy territory, a tiny speck against the vastness of the Dyson sphere, its intricate latticework visible even from here. "Think anyone's gonna miss us when we're gone?" Tiber asked, more to himself than anyone else. "Only the Xylith, and probably just for the novelty of it," Alara replied. "But like I said, this isn't over. Not yet." Tiber watched as Alara tapped furiously on her holographic interface, schematics and data flickering in and out of focus. It was their lifeline, a fragile digital thread in a web of Xylith surveillance. "So what's next on the itinerary?" Tiber asked, feigning casual interest as if they were discussing weekend plans instead of their survival. "Well," Alara began, with the kind of deliberate calmness usually reserved for bomb defusals, "I think it's time we pay a visit to an old friend." Tiber raised an eyebrow. "A friend? In this galaxy?" "What's the catch?" Alara turned, her expression a mix of determination and a hint of mischief. "I found something. a lead on an archive hidden within the Dyson sphere. If the Xylith haven't gotten to it, we might find something useful. Define useful, Tiber said, suspicion creeping into his voice like mold in a damp cellar. Think of it as a treasure trove of forgotten human culture, Alara replied. If there's anything that can rally our people, it's in there. Tiber exhaled, skepticism settling in like an unwanted houseguest. Ancient history, that's your big play. Maybe, Alara said with a shrug. Or maybe it's the key to flipping the Xylith, the cosmic bird. Now you're speaking my language, Tiber said, his interest piqued. So where's this treasure trove of yours? Alara displayed a map on her interface, highlighting a location deep within the Dyson sphere's bowels. Here, it's a forgotten sector, probably deemed too unimportant for the Xylith to bother with. Unimportant, huh? My favorite kind of important, Tiber quipped, trying to mask his apprehension with bravado. They altered course, the ship slicing through the darkness toward the unknown. The journey was tense, the silence occasionally punctuated by the distant hum of the engine and the creak of stressed metal. You know what gets me, Tiber said after a while, his voice cutting through the quiet. How the Xylith can build something like this but still can't develop a sense of humor. Maybe they think their oppression is a punchline, Alara replied wryly. We're just not in on the joke. Yeah, well, I don't think I'd laugh even if I was, Tiber muttered. The ship approached the designated coordinates, the sector ahead shrouded in darkness, save for the faint glint of metallic structures. It was starkly different from the rest of the sphere, abandoned, almost forgotten. Looks cozy, Tiber said, eyeing the dilapidated installations they were closing in on. Like the universe's most depressing retirement home. Then let's pay our respects, Alara said, guiding the ship into a gentle descent. They landed in what appeared to be a docking bay, the area devoid of life and activity. As they disembarked, the air was thick with dust, a testament to decades, if not centuries, of neglect. The corridors were narrow, the occasional flicker of ancient lighting casting eerie shadows against the walls. Feels like we're walking into history, Tiber said, his voice echoing slightly. Or a horror holoflick. Hard to tell. Keep your eyes peeled, Alara cautioned, scanning the area with her interface. The archive should be further in. Their footsteps echoed down the hall, the tension building with each step. The place was a labyrinth of forgotten technology, the kind that once promised a brighter future and now served as a cautionary tale. Any bets on what we'll find? Tiber asked, trying to lighten the mood. Knowing our luck, probably just a big fat keep out sign, Alara replied, her eyes fixed ahead. They eventually reached a large, sealed door, the kind that screamed valuable stuff inside, please don't touch. Alara approached, her fingers dancing over the interface as she worked to bypass the ancient security. Hope it's not guarded by robots with a grudge, Tiber joked, though it was half-hearted. Only one way to find out, Alara said, as the door gave a reluctant hiss and slid open. Inside was a vast chamber, a veritable vault of ancient human culture. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, filled with relics from a bygone era, books, films, music, art. It was a museum of what humanity once was, preserved against the ravages of time and tyranny. Well, I'll be damned, Tiber said, genuinely awed for once. It's like a time capsule. More like a beacon, Alara corrected, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. This is what the Xylith are afraid of, not weapons but ideas. Tiber moved through the aisles, picking up a dusty book at random. Doesn't look like much of a threat, unless you're allergic to old paper. Alara shook her head, a small smile playing at her lips. Ideas are the most dangerous weapons. These are reminders of what we're fighting to reclaim. So, what's our master plan? Start a reading club, Tiber asked, though not as sarcastically as usual. Something like that, Alara replied, her fingers dancing over the interface again. We need to create a meme, a cultural virus that'll spread faster than the Xylith can squash it. Tiber looked around, his mind racing with the possibilities and the absurdity of it all. You're serious, aren't you? Deadly, Alara confirmed, pulling data from the archive and feeding it into her holographic interface. The Xylith have the tech, but they can't kill ideas. Not once they've taken root. And you think uploading a bunch of ancient memes will turn the tide? Tiber asked, a newfound skepticism in his voice. Not just any memes are memes, Alara said. We remind people of who we were, who we can be again. Tiber watched as images and sounds came to life, a tapestry of human culture swirling around them, projected in vivid holographic form. Music, laughter, scenes of triumph and despair, all the things that made humanity infuriatingly, stubbornly unique. Well, Tiber said, genuinely impressed, I'll give you credit, Alara, you dream big. Desperate times call for desperate measures, Alara replied, her eyes alight with determination. And let's face it, we're about as desperate as they come. Fair point, Tiber conceded. So, what's next? We upload these and hope the Xylith choke on our creativity. Something like that, Alara said, her fingers flying across the interface, weaving the fragments into a cohesive whole. It'll be our final stand, a cultural revolution at the speed of light. Tiber nodded, a strange mix of doubt and determination settling over him. It was a long shot, a gamble, but at this point, what did they have to lose? And if it works, Alara said, meeting his gaze with steely resolve, we give the galaxy something it hasn't had in a long time, hope. Tiber leaned back, a slow grin spreading across his face. Well, Alara, you've got my vote. Let's give these Xylith bastards a history lesson they won't forget. The air between them crackled with a shared sense of purpose. It was madness, perhaps, but it was their madness, and that made all the difference. All right, Tiber said, clapping his hands together. Let's make history. With a final nod, Alara activated the sequence, uploading the digital meme into the Xylith's communication network. It was a shot in the dark, a last-ditch effort to ignite the spark of rebellion. A virus of ideas, spreading faster than wildfire, slipping through the cracks of the Xylith's carefully constructed surveillance. Think they'll notice? Tiber asked, watching the data flood the network. Not until it's too late, Alara replied confidently. And by then we'll have already won. They stood there, two tiny figures amidst the remnants of human culture, poised on the brink of a new dawn, a dawn where ideas, not weapons, were the ultimate power. Here's to the revolution, Tiber said, raising his imaginary glass once more. To the revolution, Alara echoed, a hopeful glint in her eyes. As the archive hummed with the hum of defiance, they knew they had taken the first step towards reclaiming their future. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was a start filled with possibility, and for now, that was enough. The Xylith Empire had as much personality as a paperclip, which was ironic, considering it was about to be undone by the very thing it lacked: humor. We just uploaded humanity's greatest hits into their system. What's the worst that could happen? Alara said, smirking as they sat in the cramped hideout. The glow from the control panel painted them in shades of anxiety and defiance. Tiber leaned back, folding his arms as he watched the data stream across Alara's holographic interface. I don't know. Maybe they'll finally develop a sense of humor and thank us. Yeah, maybe they'll throw us a parade, Alara replied, her eyes glued to the display, watching the digital meme's progress like a proud parent at a school recital. The meme was a Trojan horse of nostalgia, a cocktail of viral videos, forgotten tunes, and the best, and worst, of human culture. The Xylith, with their obsession for order, had never encountered chaos like this. And chaos, much like a cat in a room full of rocking chairs, was what the humans thrived in. Question is, will it work fast enough to make a difference? Tiber asked, a hint of genuine concern seeping through his usual bravado. Only if the Xylith enjoy a good laugh at their own expense, Alara said, fingers tapping impatiently on her knee. Which, given their track record, is about as likely as you becoming a ballet dancer. Hey, I've got moves, Tiber shot back, grinning. Just not the twinkly-toed kind. An alert pinged from the interface. Alara's eyes widened slightly. Looks like it's spreading faster than a cold at a daycare. Thank humanity for low attention spans and high connectivity, Tiber said, leaning forward. His eyes danced with mischief. So what's first on the Xylith's new playlist surprise, Alara said, a wicked glint in her eyes as she pulled up the first file. The baby shark dance, Tiber snorted. That's just cruel, cruel. Alara shook her head, grinning. Cruel would be the Macarna. We're saving that in case we really need to inflict pain. As the meme ricocheted through the Xylith network, chaos began to unravel their cold, efficient society. The Xylith AI, which had never been programmed to deal with such frivolity, was about as useful as a chocolate teapot. Alarms blared as the memes wormed their way into every facet of the Xylith infrastructure. Images flickered across Xylith screens, from command centers to personal devices. The Xylith, usually as expressive as a block of ice, were now a mixture of confusion and irritation. Reports coming in, Alara said, toggling through the influx of data. Xylith comms are a mess. They're trying to purge the system, but the memes are mutating faster than they can keep up, Tiber chuckled. It's like watching a cat try to catch a laser pointer. They'll be chasing their tails for days. And there's the bonus, Alara added, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. Their AI gone haywire. Seems it doesn't appreciate the finer points of slapstick comedy. The Xylith AI, designed for precision and logic, was short-circuiting under the assault of absurdity. Its attempts to purge the memes only spread them further, like trying to fight fire with gasoline. Let's hope they don't find the off switch anytime soon, Tiber said, peering over Alara's shoulder, or realize they can just ignore it. By the time they figure it out, it'll be too late, Alara assured him, her confidence infectious. What we've planted isn't just distraction, it's dissent. Memes questioning authority, encouraging free thought. It's a revolution in ones and zeros. Tiber nodded, his earlier skepticism giving way to genuine admiration. You really think this'll tip the scales? Not alone, Alara admitted. But it's a start. The Xylith have always been afraid of ideas. Now they're swimming in them, and it seemed the Xylith were drowning. Reports scrolled across the screen. Officers unable to receive orders, internal systems looping endlessly through dance tutorials and cat videos. Entire sectors were cut off, not through sabotage but through sheer volume of nonsense. Their chokehold on information is slipping, Alara noted, her voice tinged with hope. If they can't control the flow, they can't control us, Tiber finished, a grin spreading across his face. Damn, we might actually pull this off. We will, Alara said, determination etched into her every word. We've got the power of the internet, and if that isn't enough to topple an empire, I don't know what is. Tiber laughed, a sound as rare as a Xylith smile. Here's to the power of memes, then. Here's to us, Alara corrected. And to the future we're fighting for. As the chaos spread and the Xylith struggled to regain control, a strange stillness settled over the galaxy, a pregnant pause in the symphony of silence, like the eye of a storm. It was the calm before the dawn, the moment when the future balanced on a knife's edge. We just have to hold on a little longer, Alara whispered, as much to herself as to Tiber. He nodded, watching the screen with a mix of apprehension and anticipation. I never thought I'd say this, but I'm actually looking forward to seeing how this ends. Hope it's not with us in a Xylith detention cell, Alara replied dryly. If it is, at least we'll have the satisfaction of knowing we left them a parting gift they won't forget, Tiber said. Yeah, the kind that sticks with you like a bad song in an elevator, Alara added. As they monitored the chaos, a new alert chimed, a priority message intercepted from the Xylith command. Looks like they're scrambling, Alara said, pulling up the message. They're trying to isolate the sectors affected. Good luck with that, Tiber said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Even if they cut off the infected parts, the damage is done. Alara nodded, her gaze focused on the display. The more they fight it, the more it spreads. They'll exhaust themselves trying to play whack-a-mole with a hydra, the irony, Tiber mused, leaning back. They always said we were the chaotic ones. Now look at them. Fitting, isn't it? Alara replied, a note of satisfaction in her voice. The Xylith, tripped up by the very thing they despised about us. As the Iors passed, they watched the Empire unravel in real time. Xylith ranks fell into disarray, their rigid hierarchy buckling under the weight of the unexpected. It was a beautiful disaster, a tapestry of confusion and disorder. Alara leaned back, a rare smile gracing her lips. "We might just make it out of this alive, after all." "We better," Tiber said, his tone mock serious. "I'm not dying before I see the look on a Xylith's face when they get rickrolled." "Priorities," Alara said, shaking her head but unable to hide her amusement. As they rode out the chaos, two unlikely heroes in a battle fought with bites instead of bullets. The world around them shifted. The Dyson sphere, once a testament to Xylith supremacy, was now a battlefield of culture, where the pen, or meme, was indeed mightier than the sword. "Think anyone else is laughing?" Tiber asked, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "Maybe," Alara replied, her tone thoughtful. "Or maybe they're just confused." "Confusion's a start," Tiber said, his eyes sparkling with mischief. "Confusion leads to questions, and questions lead to change." "They do," Alara agreed, her voice steady. "And we're the ones asking the questions now." As the meme spread, ripples of dissent echoed across the galaxy. The Xylith, once confident in their control, now faced a new reality, one where their stoic facade was cracking, where laughter and rebellion mingled in equal measure. Tiber and Alara watched, two figures amidst the storm, knowing they'd struck the first blow in a new kind of war. A war fought not with weapons but with ideas, and in that war they were on the front lines. "Here's to chaos," Tiber said, raising an imaginary glass again. "Here's to freedom," Alara replied, clinking her invisible glass against his. In the silence that followed, the hum of the Dyson sphere was a song of defiance, a reminder that even in the darkest times humanity had a way of finding the light. In the end, it wasn't just a meme. It was a movement, a revolution. And as they watched the Xylith Empire teeter on the brink, they knew the future was theirs to shape. "Ready for the next step?" Alara asked, her voice full of promise. "Always," Tiber replied, a grin on his face. "Let's show them what humanity's really made of." And with that, they turned back to the screen, ready to write the next chapter in a story that was far from over. Tiber Zane leaned back in his seat, the cold blue glow of the borrowed craft's control panel casting an unflattering light on his face. He rubbed his chin, pretending to consider his next words carefully, but really just enjoying the moment. The Xylith Empire was in shambles, and he was about to stick it to them in the most delightful way possible. "Well, Alara," he said, "it looks like we're finally getting invited to the big kids' table." Alara Quill, his partner in chaos and the brains behind their viral campaign of cultural subversion, sat across from him. Her holographic interface flickered with reports of the Xylith's ongoing meltdown, cultural, political, and otherwise. She smirked, clearly savoring the spectacle. "Big kids' table." "More like the kids' table after we've spiked the punch." "Either way, they're paying attention," Tiber replied. "Right now, there's probably a Xylith elder somewhere trying to figure out why Rick Astley is trending in their system." Alara chuckled, her fingers dancing over the interface. "It's a start. We've got them so twisted, they're practically doing the Macarena just to keep up." The Xylith Empire, so meticulous in their order, had never dealt with a blow like this. Human culture was a chaotic mess of contradictions, a hydra of ideas they simply couldn't decapitate. And now, as the memes frolicked unchecked through their networks, Tiber and Alara had the upper hand, something they intended to exploit fully. A ping announced an incoming transmission. The Xylith were reaching out, something they'd only do if absolutely desperate or unbelievably stupid. Tiber figured it was a mix of both. He tapped the screen, and a Xylith official appeared, looking as dignified as one could while surrounded by holographic dancing cats. "Ah, the look of someone whose entire belief system just got run over by a clown car," Tiber quipped, gesturing for Alara to patch through audio. "Human," the the Xylith official began, his voice dripping with the disdain of a species unaccustomed to being outmaneuvered. "We request an audience to discuss terms." Tiber raised an eyebrow, leaning closer to the screen. "Terms, huh? I guess that means you didn't find the off switch for chaos." The Xylith's mouth twitched, a tick Tiber decided to interpret as barely contained rage, or possibly indigestion. "We acknowledge your current advantage, however temporary." "Temporary's relative," Alara chimed in, not bothering to hide her glee. Just like the Xylith's sense of humor, the Xylith official visibly restrained himself, the hologram flickering slightly as if reflecting his inner turmoil. "Your memes have disrupted our systems. We are prepared to negotiate a cessation of hostilities and propose a peace treaty." "Peace," Tiber mused, drawing the word out like it was a fine wine. "I like the sound of that. But you know we're going to need some assurances." The Xylith official stiffened, clearly uncomfortable. "What assurances?" Tiber exchanged a glance with Alara, her eyes glinting with mischief. "You could start by admitting that maybe, just maybe, you underestimated us." Alara folded her arms, adding, "and that the power of human culture is something you can't just sweep under the rug like a bad haircut." The Xylith official's expression hardened, but after a pause he nodded stiffly. "Your culture has indeed proved more formidable than anticipated." "Admitting you have a problem is the first step," Tiber said, unable to resist the dig. "Now, how about you stop raiding our colonies for resources, and we'll consider pulling the plug on the rickroll." "We will cease unlawful extraction of resources," the Xylith conceded, his voice as cold as space itself. "In exchange, you will assist in stabilizing our systems." Tiber suppressed a laugh. "You want the same humans who introduced your systems to slapstick comedy to help fix them." Alara leaned forward, tapping her chin thoughtfully. "We might be persuaded, but first, you'll need to let us establish a cultural exchange hub in your precious Dyson sphere." The Xylith official's eyes widened fractionally, a monumental show of emotion for his kind. "A hub. Think of it as a place where diversity meets order," Tiber said. "A space for all species to share ideas, art, music, and maybe the occasional dance-off. With the understanding," Alara added quickly, "that we'll be leading the charge. Humans in charge of cultural affairs, shaping a new order." The Xylith official looked as if he just swallowed a lemon. "Your terms are unconventional." "Unconventional times call for unconventional measures," Tiber said, leaning back with a smug grin. "And let's face it, we're your best chance at getting things under control." The Xylith official hesitated, then nodded. "Very well, we will convene with our council and ratify these proposals." "See you at the bargaining table," Alara said, cutting the transmission with a flourish. Tiber turned to her, a huge grin plastered on his face. "Did we just win a war with memes and a diplomatic proposal?" "Looks like it," Alara replied. "Funny what you can accomplish when you weaponize nostalgia and a complete disregard for authority." As the borrowed craft drifted silently through space, Tiber and Alara took a moment to bask in their improbable victory. The Xylith Empire, a monolith of order and conformity, was on its knees, and humanity was about to take on a role no one could have predicted. Tiber sighed, stretching his arms behind his head. "Never thought I'd see the day when we'd be mediators of interstellar peace." "Yeah," Alara said, glancing at the control panel. "Here's hoping our leadership isn't just leading them to more chaos." "Chaos has its uses," Tiber replied. "And besides, a little bit of pandemonium keeps things interesting. Like getting the Xylith to dance to Imka interesting." "Exactly. And who knows, maybe we'll get them to smile next." The idea of a Xylith smiling was as absurd as it was delightful, and Tiber found himself chuckling at the thought. "Now comes the hard part," Alara said, serious for a moment. "Turning this mess into something sustainable." Tiber nodded. "But we've got a chance, and we'll do what we do best, improvise." "Here's to the future," Alara said, raising her imaginary glass once more. "And here's to not getting shot down before we even start." Tiber added, clinking his invisible glass with hers. With the Xylith Empire on the back foot and a new era on the horizon, Tiber and Alara set course for the Dyson Sphere. The place that had once stood as a symbol of Xylith dominance was about to become something much more, a beacon of hope, of unity, and maybe, just maybe, a little bit of madness. As they accelerated towards their destination, Tiber couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. Humanity had done the impossible. They'd taken a weapon of mass distraction and turned it into a tool for change. "Think they'll ever forgive us?" Tiber asked, half joking. "Probably not," Alara replied, "but they might thank us one day. Yeah. After all, they say great art is supposed to provoke. Then consider them thoroughly provoked." The rest of the journey was spent refining their proposals, ensuring that when they arrived, they were ready to set the stage for a new order. An order where humans held the reins, guiding the galaxy into uncharted territory. Upon arrival, the Dyson Sphere loomed ahead like a vast, intricate puzzle, one they were determined to solve. The Xylith had already begun preparing for their arrival, a council meeting scheduled to finalize the terms of their fragile peace. Inside the sphere, the city buzzed with an unusual energy. Screens still flickered with remnants of the meme invasion, and Tiber couldn't help but feel a twinge of pride. They'd done that. They'd brought laughter to a place that had only known silence. As they docked and made their way through the corridors, the atmosphere was tense but hopeful. Xylith guards escorted them, their expressions unreadable. Tiber wondered if they'd been the ones tasked with scrubbing Gangnam Style from the network. The conference room was exactly as they remembered it, depressingly familiar in its metal sterility. But today, it held an air of possibility, the air crackling with the promise of change. The council assembled, the Xylith leaders looking both regal and uncomfortable. The holographic interface was ready, the terms of their agreement laid out in stark detail. Tiber stood, clearing his throat. "So here we are, ready to turn the page, so to speak." The lead Xylith counselor nodded, their demeanor reserved but open. "We are prepared to discuss your proposals." Alara took over, her voice steady and confident. "This isn't just about peace. It's about creating a shared future, a place where all species can come together, contribute, and learn from one another." The counselor inclined their head. "We recognize the potential. Your culture, while disruptive, has demonstrated resilience and adaptability." "Exactly," Tiber said, leaning forward. "We've got a chance to make something incredible here. A cultural hub that celebrates diversity and innovation." And, Alara added, "We'll ensure that no single entity holds all the power. Checks and balances, you know." The council conferred briefly, their discussion a low hum of agreement and caution. Finally, the lead counselor turned back to them. "We are willing to proceed with these terms. The Dyson Sphere will become a place of cultural exchange under human guidance." Tiber and Alara exchanged a glance, their victory sweetened by the knowledge that they'd done it together. "Then we have a deal," Tiber said, smiling. "Here's to a new era." As they signed the agreement, a ripple of change spread through the room. The Xylith Empire, once rigid and unyielding, was poised to evolve into something new. It was messy, it was uncertain, but it was real. Outside, the Dyson Sphere city began its transformation. Screens flickered with art, music, and ideas from across the galaxy. New species arrived, eager to contribute and learn. The city was alive with possibility, a testament to what could be accomplished when people, regardless of their origin, worked together. For Tiber and Alara, it was more than just a victory. It was a chance to build a better future, one meme at a time. As they stood on the threshold of this new chapter, they knew one thing for certain: they'd changed the game and the galaxy would never be the same. "So," Tiber said, turning to Alara, "what's next?" Alara grinned, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "Well, we've got a whole galaxy to play with. Let's see where the chaos takes us." And with that, they stepped into the future, ready to lead, with a little help from their favorite memes, of course.